The Allouez Village Board holds a meeting to discuss 5 potential plans to put a detention pond at East River Park. It's mandated by the DNR.
Community members were vocal about the plans. The Allouez Softball League disagreed with area homeowners on where it should go. A village committee has voted to lean toward proceeding with option 4, a $1.2 million plan that would remove 2 of the 5 softball diamonds at the park and could possibly impact local wetlands. The Softball League and the DNR both are leaning toward option 1, which would not remove any softball diamonds, cost less at about $680,000, and wouldn't affect nearby wetlands. People living nearby, are against option 1 because of concerns of safety and how it could be an eyesore. We will first alert you as we hear more on that decision.
Now to a first